Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, your platform for bold, accurate, and inspiring storytelling from the heart of Africa. I'm Abdul Karim Kargbo. Today, we explore a defining moment in West African history, the approved exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from ECOWAS. What does this mean for regional cooperation, economic growth, and the future of African unity? Stay tuned as we dive deep into the story that's shaping Africa's future. In a moment that has stunned the political landscape of West Africa, a historic shift is underway as military-led states signal their intent and are approved to exit the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, once foundational members of the regional bloc, are taking unprecedented steps following prolonged tensions with ECOWAS over governance, sovereignty, and sanctions. This unfolding saga raises critical questions. What will the political and economic future hold for these nations? Can regional integration survive without these key players? And what does this shift mean for Africa's collective vision of unity and growth? For the Bold African Voice, BAV, this development isn't just a story of exits, it's an opportunity to examine the bold choices, the looming challenges, and the potential for a new political order. Political context, leadership, legitimacy, and power struggles. ECOWAS, founded in 1975, has long been a symbol of regional unity and integration, promoting economic cooperation, free trade, and political stability. However, the rise of military regimes in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, resulting from coups between 2020 and 2023, has tested the bloc's principles. ECOWAS imposed economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation in response to these takeovers, demanding a swift return to democratic rule. Military leaders, however, resisted. "Our sovereignty is not negotiable," declared Mali's Colonel Assimi Goïta, reflecting a sentiment echoed across the Sahel. The bloc's rigid stance, combined with growing anti-Western sentiment and frustration over ineffective counterterrorism support, led these nations to pivot away. Leaders began questioning the value of membership in ECOWAS, a body they accused of favoring external pressures over regional realities. With approval now granted for their formal exits, ECOWAS faces a leadership dilemma. How does a regional bloc uphold its democratic values without alienating its members? Conversely, for Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the question remains: can military governments effectively govern without regional partnerships, or will they isolate themselves further? Economic impact, the cost of separation. The economic implications of these departures are far-reaching. As members of ECOWAS, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger benefited from shared trade agreements, free movement of people and goods, and development programs. Exiting this bloc jeopardizes those benefits. 1. Trade and border policies. ECOWAS promotes tariff-free trade among member states. According to the ECOWAS annual report, intra-regional trade contributes nearly 15% of West Africa's GDP. Countries like Nigeria and Côte d'Ivoire, major regional economic players, are likely to impose tariffs on goods exported from these exiting nations, increasing costs for businesses and consumers. For landlocked nations such as Niger and Mali, border restrictions with ECOWAS neighbors could create logistical nightmares. Dependency on ports in Ghana and Benin may lead to renegotiated, costlier terms. 2. Financial ramifications. The West African Monetary Union, WAIMU, linked to the CFA franc currency, could also feel the tremors. Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso's departures might lead to uncertainty about their monetary stability, impacting both local currencies and foreign investments. Economists warn that these nations could face increased inflation, higher borrowing costs, and weakened investor confidence. Economic self-reliance is commendable, notes Nigerian economist Dr. Olumide Fagbohun, but exiting regional blocs without alternatives risks destabilizing fragile economies. Social dynamics, shifts in regional identity. Beyond economics, the social fabric of West Africa faces disruption. ECOWAS, despite its limitations, symbolizes cooperation and shared identity among diverse nations. The bloc's protocols on free movement allow millions of West Africans to live, work, and trade across borders seamlessly. The exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger could reintroduce stringent border controls, For thousands of informal traders, especially women, these changes could devastate livelihoods. Additionally, West African migrant communities may face discrimination or deportation as political relationships sour. This separation also deepens existing ideological rifts. Rising nationalism in Sahel states contrasts sharply with ECOWAS's vision of unity. Youth movements in Mali chant slogans of independence, inspired by military rhetoric, while intellectuals debate whether the region is witnessing a necessary assertion of sovereignty or a dangerous backslide into fragmentation. Outlook: scenarios for regional integration. The exit of three nations from ECOWAS sets a precedent that could reshape regional politics. Several scenarios are worth exploring. 1. Formation of a Sahel Alliance. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have already announced a closer military and economic partnership under the Alliance of Sahel States. This bloc could emerge as an alternative to ECOWAS, focusing on counterterrorism and mutual trade agreements. Whether it succeeds depends on the ability to attract regional allies and secure funding for its initiatives. 2. A weakened ECOWAS. The loss of three states diminishes ECOWAS' collective influence. It exposes fault lines within the bloc, richer coastal nations versus poorer Sahel states. Leadership in ECOWAS must prioritize reforms, emphasizing inclusivity and addressing members' security concerns to restore credibility. 3. Reconciliation and reintegration. While exits dominate the headlines, reconciliation remains possible. If ECOWAS adopts a more pragmatic stance, focusing on diplomacy over sanctions, military-led governments might reconsider membership. ECOWAS needs to evolve, says political analyst Fade Fakoredi. It must balance democratic ideals with regional security needs. Regional security, a looming void, or a new strategic alliance. One of the most pressing challenges arising from this seismic shift is the security vacuum left in the wake of these exits. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are at the epicenter of the Sahel's security crisis, plagued by jihadist insurgencies that have spread instability across borders. ECOWAS, despite its perceived failures, has been a critical framework for joint military initiatives like the ECOWAS Standby Force, ESF. With these nations opting out of ECOWAS, the question arises, who will fill the security gap? While the Alliance of Sahel States promises closer military cooperation, its success remains uncertain. Experts argue that coordinating cross-border operations without the infrastructure and funding of a larger bloc like ECOWAS will be a significant hurdle. Regional powerhouses like Nigeria and Ghana are watching closely, mindful that unchecked instability in the Sahel could spill over into their territories. Dr. Salisu Yakubu, a security expert, highlights the risk. Terror groups thrive on fragmentation. The more isolated these nations become, the harder it will be to contain insurgencies. Meanwhile, international actors are stepping in. Russia's influence in Mali and Burkina Faso has grown through the Wagner Group's military support, while China has deepened economic ties. The question for the future of West Africa is whether these alliances will bring stability or introduce new geopolitical rivalries. Impact on regional development goals. Beyond immediate security concerns, the fragmentation of ECOWAS jeopardizes the collective progress toward regional development goals. Initiatives like the ECOWAS Vision 2050, which aim to create a prosperous, integrated, and peaceful West Africa, rely heavily on cohesion among member states. 1. Infrastructure and trade corridors. Projects such as the West African Power Pool, or WAP, and transnational transport corridors are designed to connect economies and promote shared development. Burkina Faso and Niger, in particular, are pivotal to projects linking coastal nations to the Sahel. Their departure could delay these initiatives, forcing countries like Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and Nigeria to reassess investments. 2. Youth unemployment and education. West Africa is home to one of the world's youngest populations, with over 60% of its people under the age of 25. ECOWAS programs supporting education and employment, such as the Youth Employment and Skills Development Project, are vital for lifting millions out of poverty. Exiting the bloc may isolate Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from these opportunities, leaving their youth at a greater risk of unemployment and radicalization. 3. Agriculture and food security. The Sahel region relies heavily on agriculture for livelihoods. Programs under ECOWAS, like the ECOWAS Agricultural Policy, ECOWAP, aim to boost food security through regional collaboration. With Niger and Burkina Faso among the region's leading producers of staple crops, their departure disrupts collective efforts to address food shortages worsened by climate change and conflict. Public sentiment, a divided narrative. Public opinion across West Africa remains divided. In Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the exits are celebrated as a rejection of foreign interference and a reclaiming of national sovereignty. Cities like Bamako and Ouagadougou have witnessed mass rallies supporting military leaders, with slogans such as "Our land, our rules" dominating the streets. However, not everyone shares this optimism. Civil society groups, youth activists, and business leaders in these countries voice concerns about economic isolation and worsening living conditions. Mariam Diallo, a Malian trade unionist, warns, "Breaking from ECOWAS feels empowering, but what's the alternative? Sanctions have crippled our economy. We cannot thrive alone." In neighboring ECOWAS, countries like Senegal and Ghana, reactions are mixed. While some view the exits as justified responses to ECOWAS's rigid policies, others fear the move weakens regional unity at a time when cooperation is most needed. Meanwhile, digital spaces are alive with debates. Hashtags like Sahel Sovereignty and Reform ECOWAS reflect the diverse perspectives, as youth influencers, political analysts, and ordinary citizens alike weigh in on the implications. Leadership challenges. A test for ECOWAS. At the heart of this crisis lies a leadership dilemma for ECOWAS. Once celebrated as a model of African integration, the Bloc now faces mounting criticism for its inability to adapt to the evolving realities of the region. ECOWAS. Leaders must address these critical questions. 1. Is reform inevitable? Critics argue that ECOWAS must rethink its approach to democracy enforcement, balancing its ideals with the political and economic challenges faced by member states. 2. How can the Bloc remain relevant? Without Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, ECOWAS risks diminishing influence. Leaders must explore ways to engage disillusioned member states and restore faith in regional governance. 3. Who will lead? As Nigeria, the Bloc's largest economy, faces its own domestic challenges, questions arise about its ability to rally ECOWAS members toward a unified vision. Meanwhile, nations like Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire have an opportunity to step into leadership roles. ECOWAS' response to this crisis will determine not just its future, but the trajectory of regional integration across Africa. The role of external influences, new alliances, or neo-colonialism. As the dust settles on the ECOWAS exits, the role of external actors in shaping the future of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger becomes increasingly evident. The vacuum left by strained regional relationships has paved the way for global powers to expand their influence in West Africa. While leaders in the Sahel portray these alliances as partnerships for mutual benefit, skeptics warn of new forms of dependency and exploitation. Russia's expanding footprint. The rise of Russia's involvement in Mali and Burkina Faso is a case in point. The presence of the Wagner Group, a private military company tied to the Kremlin, has been welcomed by military-led governments as a counterweight to Western influence and as a solution to the region's persistent insecurity. In exchange for military support, Russian companies are reportedly securing mining concessions, particularly for gold, a resource vital to the Sahel economies. Colonel Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso stated in a recent address, "We are looking for allies who respect us, not masters who dictate terms." However, critics argue that reliance on groups like Wagner brings new risks. The opaque nature of these agreements raises concerns about corruption, exploitation, and the long-term sovereignty of these nations. China's strategic economic ties. China, on the other hand, continues its strategy of economic diplomacy. Mali and Niger are increasingly turning to China for infrastructure development, loans, and investments in sectors like mining and energy. Niger's uranium reserves, essential for global energy production, have attracted Chinese companies eager to replace Western firms pushed out by political upheaval. While these partnerships provide short-term economic relief, they also carry risks. Chinese loans, often tied to resource extraction, could exacerbate debt burdens. Economic analyst Dr. Nena Okoye observes, these nations need partners, but they must ensure the deals they strike benefit their people, not just external investors. The West's shifting approach. Meanwhile, traditional allies like the United States and France face a dilemma. Long criticized for heavy-handed policies in West Africa, they now risk being sidelined. France's military withdrawal from Mali, following widespread protests, marked a significant turning point. The growing anti-French sentiment reflects deep-rooted frustration over decades of perceived neo-colonial interference. However, the West isn't stepping back entirely. The United States, for example, has prioritized diplomatic efforts, with the Sahel Stabilization Initiative focusing on economic development and governance reform. Whether these efforts can repair strained relationships remains to be seen. A people's perspective. Voices from the Sahel. While political leaders and external actors maneuver for influence, the real impact of these decisions is felt by ordinary citizens across the Sahel. From farmers in Niger to traders in Burkina Faso and students in Mali, their voices paint a sobering picture of the human cost of political fragmentation. Rising costs of living in Niger, where sanctions have cut off trade routes and frozen international aid, communities are grappling with skyrocketing prices of essential goods. The cost of grain has reportedly risen by 30% in border towns reliant on imports from Nigeria. For families already living on the margins, these economic shocks have devastating consequences. Mariam Boubacar, a market vendor in Niamey, explains, "We want our leaders to stand strong, but what about us? If trade stops, how will we feed our children?" The education crisis, a critical path to economic mobility, is also under threat. In Mali, the disruption of regional partnerships has stalled funding for educational programs, leaving schools without resources. Students face uncertain futures, with many questioning whether the political rhetoric of sovereignty will deliver tangible benefits. Hopes for a new future. Yet amidst these hardships, there remains a sense of resilience and hope. Youth movements in the Sahel are increasingly vocal, demanding not just sovereignty, but real accountability from their governments. Aisha Kanata, a student activist in Bamako, puts it succinctly, "We want a future where our leaders listen to us, not just their new allies." This emerging generation sees the Sahel's departure from ECOWAS as an opportunity to redefine governance and development on their own terms. The challenge lies in translating this energy into action. The bigger picture, implications for Africa's unity. The departure of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger sends ripples far beyond West Africa. It raises questions about the future of continental integration under the African Union, AU, and the ambitious African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA. The AU's silence on the ECOWAS crisis has drawn criticism, with many arguing that it reflects the broader struggle to balance national sovereignty with regional unity. If regional blocs like ECOWAS begin to fracture, can Africa's vision of collective economic and political strength survive? Economist Dr. Adama Kofi highlights the stakes. The AFCFTA depends on trust and cooperation. If member states begin retreating into isolation, the dream of a united Africa could be delayed for generations. At the same time, the Sahel's challenge to ECOWAS exposes an uncomfortable truth. Regional blocs must adapt to the realities of governance in Africa. Whether through reform or dialogue, their survival depends on addressing the grievances that push nations to break away. A crossroads for West Africa stands at a crossroads, caught between the promise of sovereignty and the risks of fragmentation. For Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, exiting ECOWAS is not just a political decision, but a gamble on their economic and security futures. For ECOWAS, this moment is a wake-up call to reform and reimagine its role in a rapidly changing region. As alliances shift and new challenges emerge, the path forward remains uncertain. Can the Sahel states build a sustainable future outside ECOWAS? Will regional leaders find the courage to reform? And how will the people, whose voices often go unheard, shape the outcome of this historic moment? The answers to these questions will define the next chapter of West Africa's story. The fragility of emerging alliances, risks and opportunities. As Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger distanced themselves from ECOWAS, the Alliance of Sahel States, ASS, a proposed coalition among the three military-led nations, has emerged as their primary alternative. While touted as a framework for security cooperation and regional autonomy, the alliance faces its own set of challenges that could determine its longevity and effectiveness. 1. Security coordination without regional support. The alliance aims to jointly combat terrorism, a crisis that has plagued the Sahel for years. While bilateral military cooperation between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso is a step forward, experts caution that without ECOWAS's infrastructure and international backing, sustaining large-scale operations will be difficult. For instance, the ECOWAS standby force previously served as a regional mechanism for mobilizing coordinated security responses. In its absence, the Sahel states must rely heavily on their individual resources and foreign military contractors, an approach fraught with inefficiencies and geopolitical complexities. Dr. Kamara Diop, a security analyst, argues, a shared alliance sounds promising, but without robust funding and military strategy, the alliance of Sahel states may lack the teeth to effectively challenge insurgencies that transcend borders. 2. Economic integration, a work in progress. The alliance also pledges greater economic cooperation, with leaders proposing shared trade frameworks and infrastructure development. However, these initiatives require both investment and regional trust, neither of which are guaranteed in the current climate. Economically, these nations face an uphill battle. Burkina Faso is heavily dependent on agricultural exports. Niger relies on uranium and oil exports, largely bound to external markets. Mali's gold reserves remain its economic backbone, but are increasingly tied to opaque agreements with foreign actors. To function as an economic bloc, the alliance must address critical gaps in cross-border trade, infrastructure, and monetary policy. Without clear mechanisms, this vision may remain aspirational. ECOWAS response: reform or retaliation. For ECOWAS, the exit of 3 member states marks a pivotal moment for introspection. Will the bloc choose confrontation, further isolating the Sahel nations, or embrace reform to re-establish its relevance and legitimacy? Reforming ECOWAS. The path forward critics argue that ECOWAS must adapt to the realities of governance and security in West Africa. While the bloc's emphasis on democracy is commendable, its rigid approach to political crises has alienated member states grappling with unique challenges. Key reforms could include: 1. Flexible governance frameworks, recognizing transitional governments while holding them accountable for timelines toward democracy. 2. Regional security solutions, strengthening mechanisms for counterterrorism with member states taking the lead rather than relying on external partners. 3. Addressing economic inequalities, bridging the divide between wealthier coastal nations and landlocked Sahel states, ensuring equitable development. Ambassador Olusegun Okoro, a former ECOWAS official, urges pragmatism. ECOWAS must evolve or risk losing its relevance. Dialogue, not sanctions, will bring these nations back to the table. Retaliation, a risky approach. Conversely, doubling down on sanctions or exclusionary policies risks deepening the rift. Some ECOWAS leaders have hinted at punitive measures, such as trade barriers or restrictions on labor migration, which could exacerbate economic hardship in the Sahel and fuel further anti-ECOWAS sentiment. The silent stakeholders, women and youth. Amid political maneuvers and regional realignments, the voices of women and youth in the Sahel must not be overlooked. These groups represent the backbone of their economies and the future of governance, yet they remain disproportionately affected by conflict, economic hardship, and political instability. Women as pillars of resilience. Women in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are primary drivers of the informal economy, accounting for 60% of cross-border traders. With stricter border policies and economic sanctions disrupting trade routes, their livelihoods are at risk. Awa Traoré, a women's rights advocate in Burkina Faso, laments, "We are told these exits are for our independence, but independence must mean lifting women out of poverty, not pushing us further down." Despite these challenges, women continue to mobilize for peace and economic recovery, often leading local reconciliation initiatives in their communities. Youth, between despair and opportunity. The youth demographic in the Sahel, a majority of the population, faces a precarious future. Economic stagnation, limited access to education, and rising insecurity have created fertile ground for recruitment into extremist groups. Yet amidst this despair lies immense potential. Youth movements advocating for transparency, accountability, and grassroots development are gaining momentum. In Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, young leaders are emerging with bold visions for their country's futures. Aliou Abdoulaye, a youth activist in Niger, stresses, "We don't want to inherit the divisions of the past. Our leaders must look beyond military power and focus on building opportunities for us." The domino effect, a warning to other regional blocs. The political fallout from this crisis extends beyond West Africa, serving as a cautionary tale for other African regional blocs like the East African Community, EAC, and the Southern African Development Community, SADC. Key questions arise. Will other nations follow suit? Countries grappling with internal crises or growing anti-regional sentiment may view the Sahel states' exit as a precedent. How resilient are regional frameworks? The ability of blocs like ECOWAS to respond to crises will determine their survival in an era of rising nationalism and external competition. These developments challenge the broader vision of African unity, highlighting the fragility of regional cooperation in the face of political and economic upheaval. What lies ahead? As the Sahel states chart an uncertain course outside ECOWAS, the coming months will reveal whether their bold decisions lead to greater sovereignty and progress or deeper economic and security crises. Meanwhile, the fate of regional integration hangs in the balance, with ECOWAS forced to confront its limitations and adapt to a rapidly changing geopolitical landscape. Will the alliance of Sahel states emerge as a viable alternative to ECOWAS? Can ECOWAS evolve to address the grievances that drove its members away? And most importantly, how will the people, women, youth, and marginalized communities shape this new era for West Africa? The answers are yet to unfold, but one thing is certain: West Africa's story is far from over. The broader implications, a test of African unity and leadership. As the Sahel nations, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, pursue independence from ECOWAS, the consequences reverberate far beyond West Africa. This shift poses a fundamental challenge to the ideals of African unity, long championed by visionaries like Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere. The fractures in ECOWAS are not just regional, they reflect the broader struggles of integration across Africa. At the heart of the matter lies a critical lesson. Regional cooperation cannot thrive without addressing national grievances and systemic inequalities. ECOWAS, like many African blocs, has often prioritized political ideals over the practical realities faced by its member states. Security crises, economic imbalances, and leadership failures have fueled mistrust and disillusionment, creating openings for fragmentation. If African leaders fail to respond to these challenges with urgency and foresight, the dream of a united and prosperous continent could remain unrealized. Advice to African leaders: a call for vision and unity. The exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is both a warning and an opportunity for African leaders to reflect on their responsibilities toward their people and their nation's collective future. Here are 5 critical areas of focus. 1. Prioritize regional inclusivity and fairness. Regional blocs like ECOWAS must address inequalities among member states, ensuring that both economically dominant nations and struggling members benefit equitably from cooperation. Development strategies must prioritize the poorest and most vulnerable regions, such as the Sahel. 2. Balance sovereignty with collaboration. While sovereignty is a cornerstone of statehood, leaders must recognize that global and regional challenges, terrorism, climate change, economic stagnation, require collective solutions. Dialogue and flexibility, rather than rigid sanctions, are key to addressing political disputes. 3. Invest in African-led security solutions. External powers have played a significant role in addressing West Africa's security challenges, but over-reliance on foreign actors undermines sovereignty and trust. African leaders must work to build robust, African-led security frameworks that prioritize cooperation and accountability. 4. Empower women and youth. True development and stability will not occur unless women and youth, the backbone of Africa's workforce and future leadership, are given opportunities to thrive. Governments must prioritize education, job creation, and gender equity as essential pillars of national and regional progress. 5. Reimagine regional integration. The departure of the Sahel nations is a wake-up call for regional blocs to modernize their frameworks. ECOWAS and other regional organizations must become more adaptable, democratic, and aligned with the needs of the people. Reform is not an option, it is a necessity. Summary: West Africa at a crossroads. The decision of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger to exit ECOWAS marks a historic turning point for West Africa. It challenges the region's leaders to reconcile sovereignty with cooperation, address deep-seated economic and security grievances, and redefine regional unity in a way that reflects the realities of the people they serve. Key messages emerge from this crisis. Regional blocs must evolve to remain relevant and inclusive. Sovereignty and cooperation are not mutually exclusive, but must be carefully balanced. External actors will fill voids left by fractured African alliances unless African leaders build self-reliant, homegrown solutions. The voices of ordinary people, women, youth, and marginalized communities must guide Africa's future direction. This moment in West Africa's history is not just a challenge but an opportunity for bold, visionary leadership. The decisions made now will shape the continent's trajectory for decades to come. The path forward requires courage, collaboration, and a deep commitment to the ideals of unity, prosperity, and progress. As Africa stands at this crossroads, the question remains: will its leaders rise to the occasion and forge a new path, or will they allow division to dim the light of Pan-African unity? The world is watching. Thank you for joining us on the Bold African Voice, BAV. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more bold stories that amplify Africa's voice. What are your thoughts on this historic shift? Let us know in the comments below. Together, we can shape the conversation about Africa's future. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to amplify Africa's story, one voice at a time. Advice to African leaders: a call for vision and unity. The exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger is both a warning and an opportunity for African leaders to reflect on their responsibilities toward their people and their nation's collective future. Here are 5 critical areas of focus. 1. Prioritize regional inclusivity and fairness. Regional blocs like ECOWAS must address inequalities among member states, ensuring that both economically dominant nations and struggling members benefit equitably from cooperation. Development strategies must prioritize the poorest and most vulnerable regions, such as the Sahel. 2. Balance sovereignty with collaboration. While sovereignty is a cornerstone of statehood, leaders must recognize that global and regional challenges, terrorism, climate change, economic stagnation, require collective solutions. Dialogue and flexibility, rather than rigid sanctions, are key to addressing political disputes. 3. Invest in African-led security solutions. External powers have played a significant role in addressing West Africa's security challenges, but over-reliance on foreign actors undermines sovereignty and trust. African leaders must work to build robust, African-led security frameworks that prioritize cooperation and accountability. 4. Empower women and youth. True development and stability will not occur unless women and youth, the backbone of Africa's workforce and future leadership, are given opportunities to thrive. Governments must prioritize education, job creation, and gender equity as essential pillars of national and regional progress. 5. Reimagine regional integration. The departure of the Sahel nations is a wake-up call for regional blocs to modernize their frameworks. ECOWAS and other regional organizations must become more adaptable, democratic, and aligned with the needs of the people. Reform is not an option, it is a necessity. Summary: West Africa at a crossroads. The decision of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger to exit ECOWAS marks a historic turning point for West Africa. It challenges the region's leaders to reconcile sovereignty with cooperation, address deep-seated economic and security grievances, and redefine regional unity in a way that reflects the realities of the people they serve. Key messages emerge from this crisis. Regional blocs must evolve to remain relevant and inclusive. Sovereignty and cooperation are not mutually exclusive, but must be carefully balanced. External actors will fill voids left by fractured African alliances unless African leaders build self-reliant, homegrown solutions. The voices of ordinary people, women, youth, and marginalized communities must guide Africa's future direction. This moment in West Africa's history is not just a challenge but an opportunity for bold, visionary leadership. The decisions made now will shape the continent's trajectory for decades to come. The path forward requires courage, collaboration, and a deep commitment to the ideals of unity, prosperity, and progress. As Africa stands at this crossroads, the question remains: will its leaders rise to the occasion and forge a new path, or will they allow division to dim the light of Pan-African unity? The world is watching. Thank you for joining us on the Bold African Voice, BAV. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more bold stories that amplify Africa's voice. What are your thoughts on this historic shift? Let us know in the comments below. Together, we can shape the conversation about Africa's future. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to amplify Africa's story, one voice at a time.